I get a lot of, personal satisfaction and fulfillment from creating today self-consciously. Like, I don't want people to dig back in the archives and find that original rap video. For an industry like insurance, like, I've got to do something to have some fun with it, right? People see what I publish, right? They see the content, they see the 5-minute video or the 10-minute video, but I spend an immense amount of time behind the scenes.
Welcome to Keep Hustling, where we are going past the why to get to the how. I'm your host, the always hustling Aaron Gordon, aka NY Risk Advisor, aka Mr. #Keep Hustling. In this podcast, we will be diving deep into the professional and personal successes of our guests to find out how they hustled through the most difficult times in their life and their development to achieve the success they've gotten to today. So buckle up for what hopes to be an amazing ride. And of course, now and always, keep hustling. Welcome to Keep Hustling with my guest, Curtis, aka Loss Ratio. Welcome to the show, Mr. Loss Ratio.
Oh, thanks so much, Aaron. Been looking forward to this. I think it's going to be a fun conversation.
I am pumped to have you on. If I mute myself in the middle if you're watching the video, just because I have a little cough, and I didn't want to cancel this because the Loss Ratio is not mayhem. The Loss Ratio is one of my favorite social media personas. And I want to begin by asking you, what inspired you? Or where is that inherent, I say this with respect, desire or push to be a little bit different in a very monochromatic industry? Where does that come from? Usually I ask people, where does your hustle come from? I think that your hustle, if anyone follows your content, is driven by this, like, and I said this to you before, like where everyone says it's pale, stale, and male. People turn on the video. There is nothing pale. I guess Curtis is a little pale, and I'm definitely pale. There's nothing stale about this. So, like, take me to that journey. I got to know.
Yeah, I mean, I always like to say that, I'm a creative person, I think, by nature. And I guess created that way. And so for all of my life, I have always had some kind of creative outlet, and I get a lot of, personal satisfaction and fulfillment from creating. And, I wish that I had connected the dots sooner than I did in terms of creating content around, around and within the insurance industry. But at the end of the day, I am a very passionate person. And so when I latch on to, some truths and facts and realities around issues that matter and that impact people in very real ways, I can get very personally worked up and feel passionate about making a difference in some small way. And ultimately that's what drives my motivates me and kind of drives my passion to to create content that hopefully does make people think. It educates, it inspires, and ultimately I hope it makes some kind of difference.
So I was not prepared for that answer, because what I think is amazing about that is, my next question was going to be, so then how could a person who has that creativity inherently in them, I'm less creative, I'm trying to find it. And by the way, I think it's a lot of fun. I think it's a lot of fun to embrace yourself. And I think one thing that we can agree on, that I hope that the listeners, and maybe we'll touch back on this, really think about when they're want to define who they are in their hustle, because that's what Keep Hustling is all about, is that as long as you don't offend people, like, I have never had a person who was offended, other than the fact that I'm from New York, by something that I said passionately, or persona, or a gimmick, or things like that. Like, if you're not taking yourself too seriously and offending people, then people don't really care. I'm like, dude, you chug gallons of milk. Like, it's fun. But obviously that gets eyeballs on your content, and then, as you're saying, you hope that people think. But like, if someone's offended by that, you're like, whatever, you wear that ridiculous hat, which everyone should see right now. Like, it's fine. Like, I like it. I couldn't wear it, but it's fine. You discovered that later, right? Meaning you came into the industry probably as a guy who wore khakis and a white or light blue shirt, right? And so what I love about what you're saying is that you didn't jump ship. You said, like, what drives me, what I'm passionate about is this content, this energy, this education, this persona, as I'm calling it. And you said, but I'm going to double down on insurance. Like, this is where I think I can make the greatest impact. So take us through that.
Yeah, I mean, I would be lying if I said it wasn't scary. Honestly, quite terrifying, Aaron, in the very beginning. And I had a lot of second guessing happening in my mind. But I guess going back to kind of the genesis of it, right? And this was literally 5 years ago. Where I just had this wild idea that I was going to make a rap video about insurtech, and and I
And only your immediate family would listen to it or watch it.
yeah, I didn't even want them to see it, right? Like it was that bad, and I laugh talking about it because today self-consciously, like, I don't want people to dig back in the archives and find that original rap video because it was so bad.
Remix. Let's do a remix.
Yeah, right. I probably should. But that's all part of the process, right? It's an evolution. It's growth. Um, and I like to tell the story that when I made that first one, I was equal parts excited because I had a lot of fun making it. And you mentioned that, right? I mean, that is a big component of this for me. Like, it's fun. I enjoy it. It is a creative outlet. And I do get a lot of satisfaction and fulfillment, and I hope that it makes a difference. But at the same time, um, for an industry like insurance, like, I've got to do something to have some fun with it, right? Um, but anyway, I created that first video, and I was equally excited and terrified to actually put it out there because I had no idea what the response might be. And quite frankly, I was concerned about how my clients, who ultimately are insurance carriers, how would they perceive it and what would their take be? And am I going to be getting canceled contracts the day after, right? So, um, but it was really, really refreshing, how it played out. And, ultimately, without going into all of the details, um, it slowly got around, and everyone kind of became aware. And though there were some, maybe moments in, conference calls with carriers afterwards where I wasn't exactly sure how the conversations were going to go, ultimately it has all been 99% positive.
And you know what the funny
Um,
part of it is? I bet you that if you actually think about it and could go back and speak to those people who you were most concerned about, now, and I get this all the time, like, I have carriers, the stereotypical carriers who are like, hey, can you talk to us a little bit about social media? Can you talk to our social media team? And I am definitely not an expert, but it's like the people who my parents told me, like, oh, we hope they don't see this. Like, if they see this, they may cancel our contract. And my whole thing was a few things. A, I could take it down. Right. If push comes to shove and someone calls me and says, like, we're going to cancel your contract because of that piece of content, obviously I'm going to take it down. But it was also like, that's crazy if that actually happens. And by the way, you were right and I was right. Meaning, if you were really that concerned, you wouldn't have put it out, right? Meaning, and that it's an amazing thing. And it's funny because I have this thing which you should probably, you definitely, do you have sneakers? Do you have like custom sneakers? So I have I
yes.
should actually
Yep.
put them in the background. So I have a bunch of custom sneakers. There was a guy who I met in college who did it. And I remember that, I think I can quote them on the air. Like, we work with Chubb extensively. And as you know, they're like the Cadillac old school carrier.
Yep.
And to one of their events, I wore these sneakers. And then I was going with my father, rest in peace, to a meeting in their office. And I didn't wear the sneakers. I was going to, and he told me I shouldn't. And we walk in, and a couple people in the hallway says, walking, they're like, where are the sneakers? And like, obviously the branch manager, probably closer to my father's age than mine, didn't care positive or negative. But like, I'm okay being the guy who people associate with things that are a little bit wacky, and also education and also intelligence. So My next question is, how do you mix that? How do you blend the humor and I don't want to say goofiness because it's not goofy, but you know what I'm saying? The
Yeah.
what the social media gurus say is the hook or the gimmick with a very serious topic. Because insurance in the end of the day is very serious. And anyone who looks in the news recently sees that it's all over the news and it's very serious. And people, by the way, who didn't take their insurance seriously should be taking their insurance seriously now. And they really should. So how do you handle that balance?
Yeah, I think that's a part of the creative process for me, honestly, right? Is taking something that historically and maybe, inherently is boring, right? To your point, maybe less boring today than it has been historically, because of the way that it is impacting people, really across the board and has been so front and center in the news recently and whatnot. But um, yeah, I think what people don't see, people see what I publish, right? They see the content, they see the 5-minute video or the 10-minute video, and generally speaking, I try to keep it digestible for people. Um, but I spend an immense amount of time, Aaron, behind the scenes, writing scripts and thinking through and uh, you know, and being 100% transparent, I literally spent 2 hours this morning from 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. and I basically wrote half of a script for a video, right? Like
I know it's crazy.
and a part of these are, a part of the reason for that is because, A, insurance is inherently complicated, right? And so many of the issues that are facing, you know, the industry and consumers, obviously, as a whole, um, these are very complex issues, right? These are multifaceted issues, and you can talk about any specific thing from a dozen different angles, right? Like I last week I recorded a video on underinsurance, and I talked for a half hour about property underinsurance, and I stopped recording and thought, holy cow, like I barely scratched the surface
Yeah.
of this topic, right? And so getting back to your question, and I guess maybe the point that I'm getting at is I think the challenge, and again, like to bring in that creative aspect, like the creative challenge is to take complex topics, right, condense it down into something that is short enough to be digestible, right, but long enough to be substantive. And then how do I bring in creative elements to make it interesting, right? And to hopefully keep people engaged. Um, and that's a challenge, but again, that's what I feel really passionate about, you know, rising up to that challenge, and tackling, some of these topics and issues, and again, hopefully making some small difference.
What would you say to people who are concerned that their industry or their audience would not be interested in their content?
Again, I think everyone has an audience, right? And everyone has people that are not going to be in their audience, right? I have a number of, I guess in the social media world, what you might call haters, right? Hopefully not a ton, and I certainly try not to make those, but there's a handful of people that are just always going to disagree with me on social, right? And they, you know, I just don't vibe with them, right? They don't get it, they don't understand it, and that's fine, right? Um, but at the end of the day, I think everyone, every individual, every human on Earth, right, has intrinsic value as a person, and has unique life experience, and things that they know and have learned over time, and that is valuable to someone, right? And so I think the interesting dynamic is finding your voice, having the courage ultimately to put yourself out there, and and doing that consistently showing up, and you know you'll find your audience will find you, and everyone can provide value to someone else.
And I'll tell you something else. I agree with you, first of all, 1,000%, not just 100% on that. But I think the interesting thing about the presence, respectful presence, but quirky, it's fine, is ultimately someone who doesn't want to be someone who feels that they can't interact with me because I'm a New Yorker, because I'm really passionate about insurance, because I am unapologetically passionate about independent insurance advisors and people. And it doesn't have to be me. Some of my best friends are my quote unquote competitors. But and someone who doesn't want to have that conversation, it's actually really great if they see it something that I put on social media. They don't like me for a reason that I can't explain, just because I have the New York attitude. Maybe I'm too young. Maybe I'm too old. Whatever it is, and then they don't waste my time. And that's not ego, because I wish that I could write everybody and have a multi-billion-dollar insurance agency to provide that value to people. Isn't it better if instead of having lunch with someone for an hour and a half and then cringing at the way that you're talking about the industry, because even though you'll be Curtis and not loss ratio at that lunch, presumably, it's going to
Hmm.
come out. Like, fine. If you just want the data center and not the guy who's going to be passionate, not the guy who's going to aggressively, not disrespectfully, but aggressively explain to you and try to convince you the better value that you can be getting from your insurance, then dude, just go online and buy from Geico. I'm fine with that. I'm just not going to, I'm happy that I didn't take you out to lunch. Whereas I think previously there was a lot of, you got to that, you got to that, you got to that, you got to that. Maybe you made the sale and they left, all this like that. And it was like, people could experience Aaron, NY Risk Advisor, keep hustling, latest loss ratio publicly before they interact with you privately.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think my experience has been, and this is kind of shifting the topic a little bit, Aaron, but from a sales perspective, right? And we're obviously on different sides of this, right? You're on the agent side, distribution, and ultimately, I'm on the vendor side, selling technology to insurance carriers, right? But sales is sales, and this broader concept of social selling, right, has just absolutely blown my mind over the last 2 years, and consistently showing up online. And for me, that just happens to be primarily LinkedIn, um, and providing value, right, through content that again, both, edutainment, right, is maybe kind of the
I love
buzzword,
that.
right? But,
Entertainment. I love that.
entertain people at the same time, educate them, right? Um, and that is extremely powerful, um, from a sales perspective. Uh, but it is not easy, right? It is not a quick hit and quick wins. But that consistency over time, it pays off in spades. And to your point, when you have a prospect coming to you, looking for a solution to their problem, and they've already heard you over and over again, right? Talking about their problem and talking about solutions to their problem, those are not warm leads coming in the door. Those are smoking hot leads from people who already see you as the solution to their problem. Um, and that is incredibly good for business. I'll just put
100%.
it
By the
that
way,
way.
I don't know why I start with the negative, but the positive is also true. The flip side is also true. I believe that, as we've said, and the average person dislikes insurance, views it as a necessary evil, and by the way, thinks that it's a boring, lame industry. So my hypothesis theory is, and it has proven itself, you have just verified that for me again, is when someone then gets that dreaded phone call of you must purchase insurance, or their parents or their CEO or the CFO and the control system down and says, you must deal with this insurance. Who are they going to choose to work with? They might say, there might be a light bulb that says, man, there's this guy that like, he wears these funny glasses. It's almost like the opposite, which is like you show up in their office, right? You go to meet with that carrier, they're pitching, whatever, and you're not loss ratio, you're Curtis, or like, I don't wear the baseball cap, I don't wear the hoodie or the shoes. And they're like, I want that. I want an entertainment guy. I want the guy with the PowerPoint. I want the guy. And by the way, as you said, and those leads are smoking hot. Those leads are, I don't even know, I wouldn't even call them leads.
No. Yep.
Those are clients that just haven't signed up yet. So, and by the way, I think also that it builds, I've seen incredible value from people who say things like, I saw your video and I think that I should take that advice that you gave me 2 years ago more seriously. Or I even have, and it's usually, I obviously we're respectful in the response, but it's like, how come you didn't tell me about that? And obviously I can show you notes and 20 emails where I did suggest that to you. And and it's like, wait, so I was running this risk, then I realized this. So I love that. What would you, this is one of the best conversations I've ever had on the Keep Pulsing podcast. Thank you for coming on. What would you say to yourself now when you're about to record that first video, looking back? What's the best piece of advice you would give yourself then?
I think the best piece of advice would be, bet on yourself and go all in on this. Like, I had no idea what that was going to evolve into. And that's not to say that, that's not to say that taking every risk always pans out, right? But you don't know until you try. And, whatever that thing is that, you've been putting off, or you're afraid to, afraid to dip your toes in the water. And it is human nature, right, for us to come up with a million excuses. There will always be excuses of, why not to try something or why not to take that risk. But my experience has been personally, I can't even imagine where I would be today, Aaron, if I hadn't just said, hey, I'm gonna try this, right? Like, let's give it a shot. Let's see how it goes. Because
I believe you have much less energy, much less passion about going to work. I'm serious.
Absolutely.
Much less passion about getting up in the morning and going to work. Because it would be all the time. By the way, I don't know what to think that you and I are running around. Maybe you are. Like, as you said, you prepare multiple hours for a video, but it's like knowing that there's like this good piece of content coming out, knowing that when I'm going to have a podcast and everything like that, obviously we have to sit down and do accounting in our businesses too. Like, we do that. But like, the energy for that comes from the energetic stuff. It's like working out in the morning to give yourself that energy for the rest of the day. I did want to say that I have a very close friend, and you just reminded me of this, who has a great saying that there's no such thing as half gangster. And I think that one of the things that I wish that the new generation of people coming into every industry would say is, I'm going to jump into the deep end of whatever it is. And if it doesn't work out, one thing we've learned is that people can pivot careers and all of that, but there are so many half gangsters in their 20s that could be so much more successful in their late 30s and 40s, either in that profession or in a different profession, if they just went all in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with that. It's it's the classic risk reward, right? And there's no reward without taking that risk.
What is the craziest? I didn't even think about just only talking about social media, but I think that your hustle is so defined by this like pivot. It's amazing. And by the way, I would tell people, I usually push the bio a little bit. Everybody look at Curtis's bio, click on his content, look at his company, look at the industry, look at the companies that he's worked at, and then look at the content. And you're going to think that there's either a twin, or some sort of alter ego, or very bad mental illness. But what you're hearing is that it doesn't need to be that way. And that a person can be respectful to the foundations but inspire their own hustle and drive their own success, passion, and energy via their own respectful legal hustle. What is the craziest thing that's happened to you because of your social media alter ego?
I mean, there's a bunch of different. I guess I could take that multiple ways, right? I think the reality behind content creation in general, right? There are always things happening behind the scenes, right? That will never make it past the cutting room floor.
Or maybe we should. Maybe we should send in a spy team to the loss ratios archives and dig up the lost files.
Let me share this, and this maybe even doesn't directly answer your question, but it's top of mind because it happened relatively recently. But for anyone that's followed my content for any length of time, right? I definitely I have this persona, right? It is, kind of has been developed around this, insurance slash insurtech rapper type thing, right? Basically, a couple times, 2-3 times a year, I'll write a rap about insurance or insurtech and create a music video. And so um, there's a general persona around, rap, the hip hop industry, that is just kind of fun to, to play into a bit, right? When the reality is, Aaron, like I don't even listen to rap. Like in my personal life, outside of the persona, rap is really not even my thing.
I just want to say,
Which
if you're going to say that like Jay-Z or Dr. Dre reached out to you to do a rap collab, I will immediately end the session and we'll never speak to you again for the rest of my life.
No, that is not the case. Not yet, anyway. Maybe we'll come back and talk about that when it happens. But anyway, so I have made some kind of bits of fun content joking around the idea of my interactions with law enforcement, right? Like at various conferences, I will, kind of do little spoofs and, pretend as though loss ratio, got arrested or whatever, right? And that's been a lot of fun, and
Until
people enjoy the stories around that, right? So this is just a couple weeks ago. This is why it's top of mind. But I was creating some content around mitigation, right? And I've been talking a lot about the desperately needed industry shift away from a repair and replace mindset to a predict and prevent mindset, right?
amen.
And I was, creating some content around that, and I was actually driving down the freeway, and doing everything. I have to insert this, right? Like doing everything safely. I have, cameras permanently mounted inside my vehicle that are recording me, and I'm, driving down the freeway and honestly not distracted, but just driving
Highway
and
for those of
talking,
us in
right?
New York. Just highway for the East Coasters. I apologize. I need to translate.
Yes, thank you for adding that.
Man of the people.
Anyway, yeah. Long story short, I actually did get pulled over by law enforcement, and not because I was speeding, and not because I had cameras on me or anything, but anyway, the sheriff's deputy that pulled me over, she walked up to the side of the truck, and I rolled down the window, and she kind of, and it was loss ratio, right? Loss ratio was was driving, and she kind of took a peek in the window and did like a double take. And keep in mind, this is very, very rural northern Michigan, right? I was literally 20 miles away from the Canadian border. And so this is not normal,
exactly.
generally speaking, right? And so anyway, yeah, there'll be some content coming out around that, but it was kind of, it was funny, and I was laughing because I've been making fun of having run-ins with law enforcement, and then it kind of happened for real. So
I would bail you out. I don't say this to a lot of people, but I would bail you out because it would be a great piece of content. I had an idea where I wanted to actually get the car mount and do, like, when I was traveling to Manhattan every day, an hour in the car and do content, answer a question like that. And then my wife is like, yes, obviously you'll do it all safely and legally, but like loss ratio has a bit, right? So loss ratio is a little bit of a wild child, for lack of a better term. But like,
Yes, right.
and great, and the insurance agent is not. And she's like, someone's going to see that and be like, huh? Oh, that's like the worst possible risk management. Right. Again, everyone should follow the content. If for nothing else, then loss ratio is providing education that is desperately necessary. If you don't take the advice, everyone should just be knowledgeable. And right now, insurance is front of mind, and we want to make sure that it stays there. So everyone should really check out your content, follow you, reach out to you, I assume, on LinkedIn. Where else can people reach you?
Yeah, Twitter and LinkedIn is primarily where I hang out on the socials, and I'm on those all the time. So
I love that. We end every episode by asking our guests to leave us with their favorite motivational, inspirational quote and what it means to their hustle. So with that, I'll say thank you, Curtis, aka Loss Ratio. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your journey. Thank you for inspiring my hustle. And the floor is yours.
Yeah, something that has resonated with me for a really long time, and I don't even know. I don't know who to attribute this to. You may have seen it on motivational posters, for all I know. But it's simply this: the best view comes after the hardest climb. And I wholeheartedly believe that. And accomplishing anything that matters and makes a difference is hard. It just is. There's nothing easy about it. My alarm goes off at 5 a.m. every morning, and I do not feel like crawling. There are very few days where I am jumping out of bed and ready to jump in front of the computer and and write a script, right? or edit a video. And even though, those types of things are a creative outlet for me, to show up consistently and provide value it takes an incredible amount of work. That 99% of people, unless they're also doing it, like they don't understand, right? Nobody sees the behind 100%. The scenes. Nobody, there's 90% of the hustle that nobody ever sees, right?
Nobody sees the mountain, and nobody sees the time when you record a great piece of content and forget to turn the camera on, which is the worst.
It happens to the best of us more than we would like to admit. But again, the best view comes after the hardest climb, right? And you can't build anything meaningful without putting in the work. And I guess I would cap it off with this. I get messages now on a very regular basis, not daily, right? But weekly, certainly weekly, I get messages, from people, DMs on LinkedIn or Twitter or wherever, with people that I don't know from Adam, right? Never met them. And they just say, hey, Curtis, or sometimes, hey, Loss, just want you to know, I appreciate your content. It's a bright spot in my day. It's my laugh every morning, and it gets me through the monotony of,
love that,
whatever they're doing. And that motivates me. That's a part of my best view that comes from the hardest climb.
100%. Loss ratio, whatever, Mr. Ratio. Thank you again for being here.
This has been fun, Aaron. I really appreciate the opportunity.
You got it. This has been another episode of Keep Hustling. Remember, do well by doing good, and always keep hustling. All right, hustlers, that brings us to the end of another fantastic episode. Thank you for listening. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you never miss an episode. If you have any suggestions, comments, or even just want to say hello, please feel free to reach out to us on all social media platforms. We are Keep Hustling Pod. Until next time, stay curious, stay hungry, and keep hustling.